We went into his bedroom and it was just a mountain of teddy bears, fluffy toys on his bed. And I was trying to work out, is it his bedroom or is it one of the kids' bedrooms?
He guarded the royal family for 6 years. What he found in Prince Andrew's bedroom left him speechless. A laminated card, 50 stuffed animals, and a secret so dark it connects directly to Jeffrey Epstein. Palace insiders were ordered to stay silent.
Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations of sexual assault.
But Paul Page couldn't keep quiet anymore. What he revealed will shake the monarchy to its core. Staff were terrorized, security protocols were shattered, and one woman had access to everything. You won't believe what was really happening behind those golden doors. Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations of sexual assault. For years, the British royal family has been surrounded by secrets. But now, a former royal protection officer is revealing what really went on behind palace doors. His name is Paul Page, and the revelations he's making could change everything we thought we knew about life inside Buckingham Palace. Page worked as an armed protection officer for the royal family between 1998 and 2004. For 6 years, he had access to areas of the palace that most people could never enter. He walked the same corridors as the Queen, stood guard outside private apartments, and witnessed moments that were never meant to be seen by the public. His job was to protect, to observe, and most importantly, to stay silent. But silence can only last so long, especially when what you've witnessed challenges everything the public believes about the people they're meant to respect. What makes Paul Page's story so complicated is that he himself is far from an innocent figure. This isn't a case of a model officer stepping forward with a clear conscience. Page's own past is stained with serious criminal activity that landed him behind bars and destroyed the lives of people who trusted him. Yet despite this dark chapter in his life, his claims about Prince Andrew and what happened inside the palace have gained significant attention. Not because people want to believe him, but because many of his statements align with accounts from other sources who have no reason to lie. Before we dive into what Page saw inside Prince Andrew's private quarters, we need to understand who Paul Page really is. In 2009, Page was convicted of fraud following an elaborate scheme that lasted 3 years and destroyed dozens of lives. He set up a fake property investment company called United Land and Property Development Limited, and used his position as a royal protection officer to give the operation an air of legitimacy. People trusted him because of where he worked. They believed that someone with such a prestigious job, someone who stood guard over the Queen herself, would never deceive them. He convinced 57 victims to hand over their money, including colleagues from the Royal Protection Command, their families, and friends. These weren't wealthy investors looking to make a quick profit. Many were ordinary people who had worked hard their entire lives and were looking for a safe way to grow their savings or secure their retirement. Page promised them returns of up to 120%. He distributed glossy leaflets and spoke confidently about property deals that never existed. In reality, every pound they gave him was being funneled into a growing gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control. The scheme was breathtakingly dishonest, relentless, and callous, according to the judge who sentenced him. Page didn't just lie once and disappear. He kept the fraud going for years, creating excuse after excuse when people asked for their money back. He told one victim that his father had died. He told another that he'd been bitten by a tarantula. The lies kept coming, each one more desperate than the last, as he tried to keep the scheme alive long enough to win back what he'd lost. But gambling addictions don't work that way, and eventually, the whole operation collapsed. When the case went to trial, the extent of the damage became clear. Page had stolen over £3 million. Some victims lost their entire life savings. Others had invested money meant for their children's education or their own medical care. The emotional and financial devastation left by his actions was immense. During the trial, the court heard that Page had used the money not just for gambling, but also to fund a lifestyle that included luxury purchases and expensive habits. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and his conviction became one of the biggest financial scandals ever connected to the Royal Protection Command. But Page's trial revealed more than just his own crimes. It also exposed a disturbing culture within the Royal Protection Unit itself. During the proceedings, allegations surfaced about other officers engaging in illegal activities. There were claims of officers drinking alcohol while on duty, dealing steroids, and even threatening each other over money disputes. Some officers admitted to taking photographs of themselves sitting on the Queen's throne, while others confessed to sleeping on the job. The very people tasked with protecting the most important figures in the country were, in some cases, breaking the rules they were supposed to enforce. The revelations raised serious questions about how the Royal Protection Command was being managed and whether proper oversight existed. If someone like Paul Page could run a multi-million-pound fraud operation for 3 years without anyone noticing, what else was slipping through the cracks? The scandal shook public confidence in the security system at Buckingham Palace and forced people to ask whether the institution was as secure and well-managed as it claimed to be. After Page was convicted, Buckingham Palace was quick to distance itself from him. A spokesperson stated that during the trial, Page made a series of allegations about the royal household and members of the royal family, none of which were substantiated. The palace dismissed his claims as unreliable, pointing to his criminal conviction as proof that he couldn't be trusted. And on the surface, that argument makes sense. Why would anyone believe a convicted fraudster who destroyed lives for his own selfish gain? But here's where the story becomes more complex. While Page's character is deeply flawed and his criminal actions are inexcusable, many of the specific claims he made about Prince Andrew have been corroborated by other people who worked at the palace. These aren't fellow criminals or disgraced officers. They're former staff members, other protection officers, and even journalists who visited the palace and saw things that matched what Page described. When multiple independent sources tell similar stories, it becomes harder to dismiss everything as lies. Page's decision to speak publicly about what he witnessed came years after his conviction. In 2022, he appeared in an ITV documentary titled Ghislaine, Prince Andrew and the Pedophile, where he spoke for the first time on television about his experiences working in the palace. By this point, Prince Andrew's name was already deeply entangled in scandal due to his friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, who claimed she was trafficked to have sex with the prince when she was 17 years old. Andrew has consistently denied all allegations of wrongdoing. Page's appearance in the documentary reignited interest in what really happened behind palace walls during the years when Andrew was still a working royal. His testimony wasn't just about one or two isolated incidents. It painted a broader picture of a man who used his position and privilege to behave in ways that would never be tolerated if he were anyone else. And while Page's own credibility will always be questioned because of his past, the fact that his accounts match up with other testimonies gives them a weight they wouldn't otherwise have. The timing of Page's revelations is also significant. They came at a moment when Prince Andrew was already facing intense scrutiny. In January 2022, just days before the documentary aired, a judge in New York ruled that a civil lawsuit brought against Andrew by Virginia Giuffre could proceed. Andrew's legal team had tried multiple times to have the case dismissed, but the judge rejected their arguments. The ruling meant that Andrew would likely have to give testimony under oath, something that could have exposed even more uncomfortable truths. Just weeks later, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre, reportedly paying millions of pounds to avoid a trial. Page's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about how we assess credibility and truth. Can someone who committed terrible crimes still tell the truth about other people's wrongdoing? And if multiple people are saying the same things, at what point do we have to take those claims seriously, regardless of who's making them? These are questions without easy answers, but they're central to understanding why Page's testimony matters, even if it comes from someone whose own moral compass failed so spectacularly. What Page witnessed in Prince Andrew's bedroom is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It's a puzzle that involves questions of power, privilege, accountability, and what happens when institutions protect their own instead of confronting uncomfortable truths. As we move forward, we'll explore exactly what Page saw, who else has confirmed his accounts, and why these revelations matter not just for Prince Andrew, but for the institution of the British monarchy itself. When Paul Page first entered Prince Andrew's private apartment at Buckingham Palace, he expected to see what most people would imagine a royal bedroom to look like. Perhaps elegant furniture, expensive artwork, or the kind of refined decorations befitting someone born into one of the world's most famous families. What he actually saw was something he never could have anticipated. Something so unusual that it has become one of the most talked about revelations about the Duke of York's private life. Page described a bed covered with approximately 50 to 60 stuffed animals and teddy bears. These weren't just a few childhood mementos casually placed on a shelf or tucked away in a corner. They were meticulously arranged across the entire bed, each one positioned with exact precision. For a man in his 40s at the time, someone who had served in the Royal Navy and fought in the Falklands War, this was an extraordinary sight. But what made it even more bizarre was the level of control Andrew exercised over how these toys were displayed. According to Page, there was a laminated card stored in a drawer near the bedroom. This wasn't a simple reminder or a casual note. It was a detailed diagram showing exactly where each stuffed animal should be placed. The card featured a photograph of all the bears arranged on the bed in their proper positions. Every single toy had its designated spot, and palace staff were expected to recreate this arrangement perfectly every single day. The fact that someone had gone to the trouble of creating a laminated guide, complete with a photograph, shows just how seriously Andrew took this daily ritual. The guide had a title printed at the top that read, DOY Bed, Points for Turning Down and Making the Bed. DOY stood for Duke of York, the formal title Prince Andrew holds. The document included specific instructions about which teddy bears and cushions needed to be placed where, particularly during the turn-down service when staff prepared the room for the evening. One instruction specified that when the Duke of York was staying overnight, staff should place one small teddy and cushion in the turn-down, and when making the bed, these items should be positioned next to another teddy on the left-hand side, along with certain necklaces. At the bottom of this guide, in capital letters, was a warning that read, "Do not lose the teddy and cushion." The misspelling of lose as loose was apparently part of the original document. Charlotte Briggs, a former maid who worked at Buckingham Palace during the 1990s, provided additional details that matched Page's account almost exactly. She told reporters that arranging Andrew's teddy bear collection was part of her daily responsibilities, and that she even received a full day of training specifically on how to position the bears correctly. She said that as soon as she got the job, she was told about the teddies and it was drilled into her how Andrew wanted them arranged. Everything had to be just right, she explained, describing the whole situation as peculiar. Briggs revealed that the task took her approximately half an hour each morning. The bears were arranged by size, and many of them wore sailor suits and hats, reflecting Andrew's background in the Royal Navy. He had apparently collected these bears from all over the world during his naval career, with each one representing a different place he had visited or served. While collecting souvenirs from travels isn't unusual, the insistence that they be displayed in such a specific way every single day, and the anger that resulted when they weren't, crosses into territory that many find concerning. The evening routine was even more elaborate. At bedtime, Briggs had to remove all the teddies from the bed and arrange them around the room in specific locations. The smaller bears had to be stacked in an unused fireplace, again organized by size to make them look pretty, as she put it. Andrew's two favorite bears were given special treatment. They sat on what Briggs described as two thrones positioned on either side of the bed. The remaining bears would be arranged at the foot of the bed on the floor. Each bear had a set place, and deviating from these positions was not an option. But the most disturbing aspect of this obsession wasn't the arrangements themselves. It was what happened when staff made mistakes. According to Page, if the bears weren't put back in the right order, Andrew would shout and scream and become verbally abusive toward the maids. This wasn't a case of him politely correcting an error or asking staff to fix something. It was aggressive, hostile behavior directed at people who were simply trying to do their jobs. The fact that a grown man would verbally abuse palace staff over the positioning of stuffed animals reveals something deeply troubling about his character and his view of the people who worked for him. The Netflix film Scoop, which dramatized Prince Andrew's disastrous 2019 Newsnight interview, included a scene that brought this behavior to life for millions of viewers. In the film, Andrew is shown watching a news report about Jeffrey Epstein's arrest when he notices a palace maid arranging his teddy bears. She hasn't placed them correctly, and Andrew turns his attention away from the serious news about his friend to focus instead on correcting the maid's mistake. He picks up one of the bears and begins questioning her in a patronizing tone. In the scene, Andrew holds up a stuffed kangaroo and asks the maid where it goes. When she hesitates, he gives her what he considers a helpful clue, telling her it's a marsupial. He then says the bear's name is Roo, as in Kanga, and asks her to put them together to figure out where it should be placed. When the confused maid responds incorrectly, saying Rukanga, Andrew becomes visibly frustrated and dismisses her. The scene, while dramatized, was based on real accounts from people who worked in the palace and witnessed this kind of behavior firsthand. The daughter of actress Kate Winslet, Mia Threppleton, played the chambermaid in this scene. Her portrayal captured the humiliation and confusion that palace staff must have felt when subjected to Andrew's anger over something so trivial. For viewers watching at home, many of whom had never heard about Andrew's teddy bear collection, the scene was shocking. It seemed almost too absurd to be true. Yet multiple sources had confirmed that this was indeed how things worked in Andrew's private quarters. When journalist Elizabeth Day visited Prince Andrew's office at Buckingham Palace years earlier, she noticed an oversized teddy bear in the hallway outside. When she was brought in to meet Andrew, she asked him about it. He told her it had been a wedding gift from his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, and that he had found it waiting for him in the horse-drawn carriage that took them from Westminster Abbey to their wedding reception. According to Day, Andrew found this memory extremely funny, even though several years had passed since his divorce from Ferguson. Day later wrote about the encounter, noting that it seemed rather strange to her that a grown man should be so amused by the presence of a stuffed toy. Andrew himself has acknowledged his fondness for teddy bears, though he's never addressed the allegations about his abusive behavior towards staff. In a 2010 interview, he admitted that he had always collected teddy bears, and that everywhere he went in the Navy, he used to buy a little teddy bear. He said he had accumulated a collection from all over the world. While collecting souvenirs is perfectly normal, the way Andrew managed his collection and the treatment of staff who handled it tells a very different story. A more recent book by royal author Tom Quinn, titled Yes Ma'am, The Secret Life of Royal Servants, provided updated information about Andrew's continued attachment to his collection. Quinn, who based his book on interviews with current and former palace staff, claimed that Andrew now has between 20 and 30 teddy bears, and that he still has a member of staff whose job includes arranging them in the exact position he likes every single day. According to Quinn, Andrew can be quite short-tempered and angry if the bears aren't placed exactly as he wants them. And when he finds someone who is very good at arranging them correctly, he clings to them and insists on having the same person do it every day. Quinn described the story of Andrew and the teddy bears as very revealing, suggesting that it says something important about his personality and how he relates to other people. The author noted that a lot of palace staff don't think very much of Andrew because they find him entitled and bad-tempered. Quinn suggested that much of Andrew's anger and frustration stems from his belief that he would have made a better king than his older brother, now King Charles III. This sense of being passed over, of being less important despite being born into royalty, may have contributed to the way he treated those around him. The teddy bear story might seem like a minor eccentricity, the kind of quirky detail that makes royals seem more human and relatable. But when you look at it in context, alongside the verbal abuse, the rigid control, and the complete disregard for the dignity of the people tasked with serving him, it becomes something much darker. It's a window into how Andrew viewed his position and his power, and how he believed he had the right to treat people who worked for him. These were individuals doing their jobs, often working long hours for modest pay, and they were being shouted at and humiliated because they placed a stuffed animal 6 inches to the left instead of 6 inches to the right. This wasn't an isolated incident or a bad day. This was a pattern of behavior that lasted for years and was witnessed by multiple people who had no connection to each other and no reason to fabricate similar stories. The consistency of these accounts, from Paul Page to Charlotte Briggs to the anonymous staff members who spoke to various authors and journalists, creates a picture that's difficult to ignore, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be to acknowledge. While Paul Page's revelations about Prince Andrew's bedroom behavior were shocking in their own right, they were only part of what he witnessed during his time at Buckingham Palace. Perhaps even more significant were his observations about who had access to Andrew's private apartments and how the normal security protocols that applied to everyone else seemed to vanish for one particular visitor. That visitor was Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite who would later be convicted of sex trafficking and recruiting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein to abuse. Maxwell wasn't just an occasional guest at the palace. According to Page and other officers who worked there, she was a regular presence in Andrew's life during the early 2000s, with a level of access that far exceeded what was typically granted even to close friends of the royal family. When most people visited Buckingham Palace, they had to go through a series of security checks. Their names would be recorded in a visitor log, their identification would be verified, and they would be escorted to their destination by palace staff. These weren't optional procedures. They were fundamental security measures designed to protect the royal family and maintain a record of who entered and exited the palace grounds. But for Ghislaine Maxwell, these rules apparently didn't apply. Page first became aware of Maxwell's unusual access around 2001, when he was working at the front gate of Buckingham Palace. His job included managing who was allowed to enter, checking them against a daily list of expected visitors, and recording their names in an official logbook. On one particular day, an officer called him at lunchtime and told him that there was an appointment for Prince Andrew, but that he should not write the person's name in the book. This was highly irregular. Palace security existed for a reason, and keeping people's names out of official records went against everything the protection officers were trained to do. When Maxwell's car arrived, officers were instructed to simply wave her through without the standard checks. She would drive straight to the quadrangle area of the palace and head directly up to the Duke of York's apartments without anyone questioning her or documenting her arrival. Page learned Maxwell's identity after this first encounter, and it immediately caught his attention because she was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, the disgraced British media tycoon who had died in 1991 under mysterious circumstances. After his death, it emerged that he had stolen millions of pounds from his own employees' pension funds, destroying countless lives in the process. His daughter Ghislaine had subsequently spent more time in New York, but remained a fixture in London high society. After that initial visit, Maxwell became what Page and other officers described as a regular visitor to the palace. The standard procedure was that whenever Ghislaine showed up, she was to be let straight in without question. Officers stationed at various points throughout the palace grounds knew her by sight and understood that she was to receive special treatment. Page stated that they would wave her in, and she would go straight to the quad and directly up to the Duke of York's apartments. He emphasized that she had access like no other individual outside the royal family, describing her as being on another level entirely. The frequency of Maxwell's visits was remarkable. One of Page's colleagues specifically remembered a day when Maxwell came to the palace 4 times between morning and evening. She kept coming in and out, as if the palace were her own private residence, rather than the official home of the British monarch. This level of access was unprecedented for someone who held no official position, had no formal role within the royal household, and was not a member of the royal family herself. Even close friends of other royals were subject to more scrutiny than Maxwell apparently received during her visits to see Prince Andrew. The officers working at the palace quickly formed their own opinions about why Maxwell was being given such extraordinary privileges. Page and his colleagues believed they were witnessing something more than a casual friendship. From the way she was allowed to enter and exit the palace at will, they realized, or at least suspected, that she might have had an intimate relationship with Prince Andrew. Page later described this as his honest-held belief based on what he observed during his years of service. The other protection officers shared this assessment, and they discussed it among themselves, though always quietly and carefully given the sensitivity of speculating about a royal's private life. One particular incident solidified Page's belief about the nature of Andrew and Maxwell's relationship. He recalled walking through the palace gardens with a colleague when they came across Andrew and Maxwell having what he described as an intimate picnic. The location of this picnic was significant. It was right outside the Queen's bedroom window, in full view of where the monarch herself could have looked out and seen them. The casualness with which they conducted themselves in such a prominent location suggested a level of comfort and confidence that went beyond what would be expected of ordinary friends. For Page, seeing them together in that setting confirmed his suspicions about their relationship. Maxwell's behavior toward the palace staff also left a strong impression on those who encountered her. Page described her as very aloof in her interactions with the protection officers. She wouldn't say hello when she arrived. She would simply look at the officers and then look away, as if they weren't worth acknowledging. Page went so far as to say she wasn't a friendly person, and that she almost seemed to look down on the security staff. This attitude matched the broader pattern of how those in Andrew's orbit often treated the people who worked at the palace. They were there to serve, to facilitate, and to stay out of the way, not to be acknowledged as human beings deserving of basic courtesy. The officers working at the palace understood something else very clearly. They knew that if Maxwell was ever denied access, or if anyone tried to enforce normal security protocols with her, Prince Andrew would respond with fury. Page stated that they all knew if she was denied entry, they would be screamed and shouted at by Andrew. This created an impossible situation for the protection officers. Their job was to maintain security and follow proper procedures, but they also knew that doing so would result in verbal abuse and potential consequences for their careers. Andrew had essentially bullied and manipulated them, as Page later put it, into breaking strict security rules for Maxwell's benefit. Some officers did try to raise concerns about this arrangement. They understood that what was happening violated established security protocols and created potential risks. But they were frightened to push back too strongly because they knew there would be repercussions. Working for the royal family came with certain expectations, and one of those expectations was discretion. Officers who complained too loudly or made too much trouble could find themselves reassigned, passed over for promotions, or forced out of the prestigious Royal Protection Command altogether. Page told reporters that other officers he knew from his time at the palace remained too scared to speak up even years later, partly because they worried it might breach the non-disclosure agreements they had signed. The special treatment Maxwell received wasn't limited to informal visits. She was also present at official royal events, where her connection to Andrew was on display for those paying attention. In 2000, Maxwell brought Jeffrey Epstein as her guest to a party at Windsor Castle celebrating Prince Andrew's 40th birthday, as well as Princess Anne's 50th and Princess Margaret's 70th birthdays. Epstein's presence at such a significant private royal gathering demonstrated just how deeply integrated both he and Maxwell had become in Andrew's social circle. This was years before Epstein's crimes became widely known, but it showed the level of trust and closeness that existed between these individuals. Photographs later emerged showing Maxwell and Andrew together at various social events. One particularly infamous image showed Maxwell sitting on a throne at Buckingham Palace, a casual display that would never have been permitted for an ordinary visitor. Another photo showed Andrew, Maxwell, and Epstein together at Royal Ascot, the prestigious horse racing event attended by the royal family each year. These weren't secret meetings or hidden encounters. They were part of a public friendship that Andrew seemed to have no concerns about displaying, even as questions about Epstein's behavior began to surface in some circles. Maxwell's relationship with Prince Andrew stretched back years before she began bringing Epstein around. They had known each other since the 1980s, moving in the same elite social circles in London. Maxwell came from a background that, despite her father's disgrace, still carried weight in certain parts of British society. She knew how to navigate these circles, how to make herself useful to powerful men, and how to maintain access to the kinds of people who could enhance her own status and influence. Her friendship with Andrew served both of their purposes. He gained a sophisticated, well-connected companion who could introduce him to wealthy and influential people. She gained access to royal events, royal properties, and the kind of social legitimacy that comes from being close to a member of the British royal family. But this friendship would eventually become one of the most damaging associations any modern royal has ever had. In December 2021, Maxwell was convicted on 5 federal counts, including sex trafficking of a minor, for her role in recruiting and grooming young girls for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse. The trial revealed horrifying details about how she and Epstein operated, how they identified vulnerable young girls, and how they created a system that allowed Epstein to abuse victims for years. Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and her conviction meant that Prince Andrew's association with her and Epstein could no longer be dismissed or downplayed. For Paul Page and the other officers who had watched Maxwell come and go from Buckingham Palace with such ease, the conviction confirmed what some of them had long suspected. They had been watching someone who was actively involved in one of the most disturbing criminal enterprises of the modern era, someone who used her connections and her access to powerful men to facilitate abuse. And they had been ordered to let her in without question, to keep her name out of official records, and to pretend that nothing unusual was happening. The full weight of that reality, of having been made complicit in providing access to someone later convicted of such horrific crimes, has haunted some of those officers ever since. The teddy bear obsession and Ghislaine Maxwell's unlimited palace access were disturbing revelations, but they were part of a much larger pattern of behavior that defined Prince Andrew's character throughout his adult life. Multiple sources, spanning decades and including people from very different backgrounds and positions, have described consistent experiences of being treated poorly, dismissed, humiliated, or verbally abused by the Duke of York. One of the most revealing accounts came from a senior footman who worked at Buckingham Palace. According to this footman, when staff members went to wake Prince Andrew in the morning, his typical response wasn't a polite good morning or even a groggy acknowledgement. Instead, the response could easily be an aggressive expletive telling them to go away. This wasn't the behavior of someone having an occasional bad morning. It was his standard way of interacting with the people whose job was to serve him. Charlotte Briggs, the former maid who spoke about arranging Andrew's teddy bears, also shared another disturbing memory from her time working at the palace. In 1996, she was bitten by Andrew's Norfolk Terrier while performing her duties. Most people, upon seeing someone injured by their pet, would express concern, offer help, or at the very least apologize. Andrew's response was to laugh. According to Briggs, he wasn't bothered at all by the fact that his dog had just attacked a member of his staff. Paul Page provided additional disturbing details in his appearance on the documentary Prince Andrew Banished. He described how different women would visit Andrew's private apartments on what seemed like a daily basis. One particularly ugly incident involved a situation where a woman was denied entry to Andrew's residence by palace security. This apparently enraged Andrew, who then called one of the protection officers on the phone and, according to Page's account, called the officer a highly offensive name involving crude sexual language. These accounts were later corroborated in a biography by author Andrew Loney entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. What emerged was a consistent portrait of someone who was particularly horrible to staff. Andrew didn't seem to see palace workers as normal people. He treated them as basically subordinates to be bossed around, showing no recognition of their humanity or dignity. The book detailed several specific incidents. In July 2005, Prince Andrew was at Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland when informed about storm damage. David Anderson, who was head of the household, made a minor error in terminology when discussing a tree planted by the Queen Mother. Andrew's response was to unleash profanity, calling Anderson an imbecile and ordering him to get out. A royal aide who witnessed the incident later described Andrew's behavior as unbelievably cruel. These revelations about his treatment of staff emerged alongside much more serious legal problems. In August 2021, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit accusing Andrew of sexually assaulting her when she was 17, claiming Epstein and Maxwell had trafficked her. On February 15, 2022, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement estimated at around £12 million. Days before the settlement, Queen Elizabeth stripped Andrew of his military titles and royal patronages. The combination of revelations has created a comprehensive picture of someone who used privilege as a shield and never faced meaningful consequences until scandals became too public to ignore.